in Birmingham. Darren, first, I think if we can speak to you, it was obviously a keynote moment for her to actually settle the nerves and steady the ship. Did it actually do that, do you think?
Yeah, let's be honest about all of this. The Prime Minister has had, Mark, an incredibly difficult first month. And it only got worse, frankly, let's be honest as well. When it started this conference on Sunday, almost every successive day, things seemed to fall apart, whether there was that U-turn on the 45p pence cut, or whether it was yesterday, the breakdown effectively of discipline within the party, even within the cabinet, quite extraordinarily. So today was a moment for the Prime Minister to try and reset things, to try and set out her stall, tell a personal story, but also to frankly try and get a grip again of the party. Now, did I think she did a pretty good job? In many ways, she did. She is setting up a narrative here that could be very, very effective, that she is someone who's going to be on the side of the grafters, the people who go to work every day, the people who generate growth for Britain, and that she wants to further encourage them and everyone else to try and grow Britain. And she is, and would take on the Greenpeace protesters and everyone else in the kind of what she would brand anti-growth agenda. And that is a dynamic, and I think that could really well be quite effective. And it was really interesting. You talked there about fiscal responsibility. She was very keen to note that, wasn't she, given what's happened with the markets, and given the fact that we haven't had any OBR forecasts to say that she will run a government of sound money. All I would add, though, is that, you know, she hasn't got the personal kind of eccentric charisma of Boris Johnson. She's not as good an orator as Tony Blair. It was still a pretty good speech. It was enthusiastically welcomed in the hall. Is this enough, though, to change the minds of people inside and outside the party who are now against her? I'm not entirely sure it was, but it was a speech that was true to what Liz Truss really genuinely believes in, that she thinks the status quo is not working. She wants to change, deregulate, cut taxes to try and spur on growth, and she is going to stick at the moment to that path. The big question is, will the party allow her to do it?
Tom, they absolutely loved it in the hall, but there is no doubt that the tensions in the Conservative Party are not just simmering underneath, they are simmering overtly and in public. How do you put a stop to that? How does she put a stop to it? Is it possible to put a stop to it when, at the beginning of a premiership, people feel that they can be so outspoken?
Yeah, there's a couple of schools of thought here, I suppose. On the one hand, there was not a lot of party discipline under the last administration. Some might say that the 2019 intake, given how they were incubated into Parliament there for a month or two until lockdown fell upon the country, not the normal way that you would sort of be introduced to the whipping system, the normal way of introduced to that sort of party discipline never really came about in this Parliament. With all of these new MPs. There are over 100 Conservative MPs who first got elected in 2019. Now the question is it possible to have traditional party discipline given the way that this intake had been incubated? A couple of schools of thought on that, of course, but clearly it's not been a particularly easy journey for the Prime Minister, and some might say the Prime Minister has not made things particularly easy for herself over the last few days. But it must be said, in all that she could have done with this speech today, I think it's fair to say that she did. Now, as Darren was rightly saying earlier, this is not a big changing moment. This does not mean that she's absolutely out of the rocky waters, that she's in the clear, that everything's going to be smooth sailing. Of course, the party's still very much in the schools, but for that speech, I think in some ways Liz Truss was able to confound some expectations. She's often referred to as relatively wooden in performance. She herself has said on many occasions she's not the most charismatic performer, and yet the way that she responded to those protesters with ad-libbing lines and indeed referring back to it later in the speech showed a bit more perhaps humanity, perhaps dynamism than many people might have expected. I think to some extent those two Greenpeace protesters were the best thing that could have possibly happened to Liz Truss. They gave her a gift left, uniting the room behind her and demonstrating the very anti-growth coalition that she very much wanted to talk about. This is going to be a big, big theme of the narrative of this government in the coming days, weeks and months, how the country has been held back by so many different vested interests who've stopped us building, stopped us declaring energy independence, stopped us cutting taxes, stopped the country in so many different ways, wherever it might be. The anti-growth coalition argument could be a very powerful line, and it was so ably demonstrated there by those two protesters.
Just to pick up on just what Tom was saying, though, the problem, I think, for the Prime Minister is that some of those anti-growth people, Mark and Gloria, are inside the Conservative Party, and they're still there. I mean, house building, a very good example. You know, there are a lot of NIMBY Conservatives up and down the country. Boris Johnson tried to change planning laws and met a wall of opposition. And that is the problem for the Prime Minister, is that actually at almost every turn, trying to achieve this growth, trying to achieve this deregulation, will mean that she will come up against opposition, like Greenpeace and other people, like Labour, but also she will come up against people inside the party who, frankly, do not like her either. And that's why it's going to be tricky. The one thing I would also, though, add, and you can tell this today, and I've actually spent quite a lot of time with the Prime Minister this week, you know what, there is no sign of the burden of office on Liz Truss. She was enjoying that speech today, and actually it's quite remarkable. You know, lots of politicians under the incredible pressure that she is under, you know, you could see it with Theresa May almost weigh on her. Liz Truss actually seems to be relishing this. She really seems to be enjoying it despite those difficulties.
Yeah, I had the chance to have a chat to her a couple of nights ago, and I really did get the sense that this was not someone who I suppose you wouldn't have thought this is someone who's been through the days that she has been through. That's a really astute observation, because Liz Truss really does seem to be perhaps peculiarly enjoying the role, and perhaps that's normal for a Prime Minister. I mean, it's quite a good job to have, despite the burdens of office, but it does seem that Liz Truss is trying to make the most of it.